I got to wait for that cue. In Unit 4, we've combined, just, one of those things in outlining how we're going to assign certain quantities of material for you to translate. This one kind of bridges chapters 13 and 14. The first part in chapter 13, after the separation of the companies of Lot and Abram, the reiteration of the promised land is outlined at the conclusion of chapter 13. Again, in this case, after their division, no doubt that they are somewhere in the neighborhood of Bethel. That's where geographically where the division between Lot, he's somewhere in this region. At the end of chapter 13, he's going to move down to Hebron, near the Oaks of Mamre. But he's somewhere in the Central Hill Country. Again, Bethel would be a pivotal point in subsequent patriarchal history and then later in Israel's history. That's why Jeroboam I, when the kingdoms split after Rehoboam's rejection of the advice of the elders, Jeroboam builds an altar with a temple at Bethel and then another one up at Dan as kind of a border sanctuary in the division of the kingdom because of Bethel's importance in the previous patriarchal Israelite history. So the land that is promised, he's instructed to lift up his eyes. Now, as God's directive, you go back in that previous material with regard to Lot, we have Lot lifting up his own eyes and looking down into the Jordan Valley. So Lot, verse 10, lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was a bountiful region, and so he would go that direction. In the end, with this divine promise of the land, God instructs Abram to lift up his eyes, look from the place where you are northward. Again, Bethel is kind of centrally located. Look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, back toward the Jordan, and to the west toward the sea. For all the land that you see, I will give it to you and your descendants. And I will make your descendants plentiful, like the dust of the earth. As if anyone could even number the dust of the earth, then your descendants will also be numbered. Now, arise, walk about. Again, instruction. Kum and then Hithalek. Walk throughout the land, throughout its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. So he is instructed to walk throughout the land, north to south, east to west, and God's promise is reiterated. I will give this land to you. So, after this mapping out of the land, marking it out, Abram moves down to the region of the Oaks of Mamre, down toward Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So he encounters the Lord through the customary means of sacrifice. So that's where we end in chapter 13, the promise of the land. Abraham is living in the promised area of the land. Lot has moved down to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, let me just highlight one aspect. In the beginning of chapter 14, which I had you kind of skip over, this land of first the kings that come from Mesopotamia, the kings Amraphel from Shinar, which is in the Babylon region, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam. Elam is kind of southeast of Babylon, and Tidal, the king of Goyim. A couple of those we don't know exactly where they were located, but they are all from the general Mesopotamian region. But they came and they warred against the wealthy region of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as the other kings of Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, which is also called Zoar. All these came as allies to the valley of Siddim, that is to the region of the Dead Sea, here called the Salt Sea. In other language of the Bible, Dead Sea, Salt Sea. In the New Testament period, it's not actually called this in the New Testament, but it was also called the Asphalt Sea. In the Latin, Mare Asphaltitis, because in the geological substructure of the deep portion, the northern part of the Dead Sea, you have coal tar strata that would occasionally break free during times of earthquake and other subterranean activity, and they would float to the surface. And because oil floats in water, and especially in highly salty water, like the Dead Sea is, close to the surface, and they would actually harvest that material and use this coal tar, we sometimes call it, to seal boat hulls, seal your cisterns, and anything that needed sealed from water or to contain water. It was called the Asphalt Sea at times in the New Testament era. So just a quick note there. Now, people have long wondered, where were these cities? And for a long time, there was this mistaken idea that the southern end of the Dead Sea, which is very shallow by comparison to the northern portion, which is like 1,200 feet deep. If you go about 5 miles south of where the Jordan comes in, there's a place in the middle of this deep gorge valley where the Dead Sea, is over 1,200 feet deep. The southern end, if you go there today, much of it is above because the Dead Sea is sinking because very little water is flowing into it, unlike what it did in ancient times and up until modern Israel. So that there's a continual drop. It's dropping more than a foot every year in the surface level of the Dead Sea. But back then, the Dead Sea was higher and as a result, deeper. Sodom and Gomorrah were not in the southern end of the Dead Sea. There's some recent excavations done north of the Dead Sea, where there are a couple of the archaeologists there think that may be the area of Sodom and Gomorrah. There's a pair of cities that were destroyed at the end of the early Bronze Age, beginning of the Middle Bronze Age, that may represent the cities that are described, because the area that is described looking down toward the Jordan from Bethel would be the area just beyond Jericho. It would include perhaps the area around Jericho and the area across, where there is, again, even today, luxurious farming areas, as it's described, a well-watered, green, growing region. And the ancient times when the overflow of the Jordan happened in the area resulted in quality productivity. Zoar traditionally has been located just south of the southern end of the Dead Sea. One of the interesting things that also is noted in the text is called Bela, that is Zoar. And we have numerous examples of this in the Bible. You remember in the Bethel story, it was originally named Luz, L-U-Z, renamed Bethel. Hebron was originally called Kiryat Arba, the city of 4. And so you have a lot of these updates, and perhaps in the history of the editing of the text, giving it names that are better known in the later times. Zoar versus Bela in this history, but Zoar is traditionally. The Admah is north. Generally, Admah is located at a site close to where the Jabbok River, about 25 miles to the north of Jericho, where the Jabbok River comes in from the Jordanian side into the Jordan River. It was an ancient fording point, and in modern history, it was a place where you cross into the modern country of Jordan into Israel or vice versa. The Adam crossing, it's sometimes referred to. So Zeboim, we don't know, but perhaps further excavations in the future will reveal to us more convincingly exactly where Sodom and Gomorrah were located. But I can tell you they weren't in the southern end of the Dead Sea. There's just no evidence whatsoever, in spite of the lowering of that area to many of the rocks in the floor of the Dead Sea are now above the water level and highly encrusted with salt. And there were no city formations in this area.